My name is Mike, and for the most part, I've had a good life. I'm 38, live in a nice home, and own a small share in a construction business. I'm a junior partner, and while I'm not rich, I'm doing well enough to give my wife Sarah and me a comfortable life. Sarah and I have been married for 8 years. We don't have kids, but we've built a life together that I thought was solid. She's always been the center of my world. Sarah has always had big dreams. She loves books, reading them, collecting them, and even writing the occasional short story. Over the years, she's often talked about combining her love of books with her love of good coffee and sweet desserts. She dreamed of opening a themed café, a cozy place where people could come to read, sip coffee or tea, indulge in some delicious pastries, and connect with others who share their passion for stories. A year ago, we made that dream come true. Sarah found the perfect location in one of the city's upscale neighborhoods, a charming corner property with big windows and warm lighting. It was ideal for the kind of book cafe she'd always envisioned. The rent wasn't cheap, and the renovations required a significant investment. Sarah was nervous about the costs, but I told her not to worry. I dipped into my savings and took out a small loan to help her get started. When Chapters and Cream opened, it was everything she had dreamed of. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the air was filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and buttery croissants, and the cafe quickly became a hit with the neighborhood crowd. Seeing Sarah smile as she welcomed customers, chatting with them about their favorite books, made me feel like I'd done something meaningful. I was proud to have supported her dream, to give her something she could call her own. But recently, something has been off. At first, it was subtle. Sarah seemed preoccupied, even when we were alone. She started staying late at the cafe more often, saying there was always something to do. I didn't mind. I understood how much work went into running a small business, especially in the first year. But then her behavior began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. She was less affectionate, sometimes distant. She started paying more attention to her appearance, wearing dresses I hadn't seen her in for years, and spending more time than usual in front of the mirror before heading out. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just feeling the pressure of running the cafe. Maybe she was trying to make a good impression on her new customers. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. My instincts told me that my wife, my partner, the woman whose dream I had helped bring to life, was hiding something. It was a Thursday evening when Sarah walked through the door with a bouquet of bright yellow roses. I was sitting in the living room, nursing a cup of coffee, trying to catch up on the game I'd missed last weekend. The flowers caught my attention immediately. "You bought flowers?" I asked, surprised. It wasn't like Sarah to do that out of the blue. She smiled, her cheeks slightly flushed. "No, they're not from me," she said, placing the bouquet on the kitchen counter. "They're from a client, a regular at the cafe. His name's Ethan. He brought them in today, said he wanted to thank me for the recommendation I gave him last week." My stomach tightened. "Recommendation?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could manage. "Yeah, about a book. He's really into historical fiction, and I suggested this lesser-known gem about the Civil War. He loved it, apparently, and thought the flowers would be a nice gesture." She said it so breezily, as if it was nothing at all, but something about the way her smile lingered made me uneasy. "Ethan," I said slowly, as though testing the name. "You've mentioned him before?" Sarah nodded, still arranging the flowers in a vase. "He's been coming in regularly for a couple of months now. He's just one of those people you can't help but notice. Very charismatic. Always has interesting things to say. He's read so many books. It's fascinating." She paused, looking thoughtful, and I felt the first pangs of something I hadn't experienced in years: jealousy. My wife was talking about this man with a light in her eyes, a kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a long time, not even when we talked about the cafe, her greatest passion. "Charismatic, huh?" I said, forcing a chuckle. "What does he do?" "Oh, he's a lawyer," she said, as if that explained everything. "But he's got this whole other side to him. He's an amateur historian, loves to travel. You'd like him, Mike. The way she said it, that I'd like him, made me feel even worse. She didn't notice my expression until she turned around, holding the vase now filled with the bright yellow roses. Her face fell slightly as she caught my eyes. "You're tense," she said, coming closer. "Mike, you're not upset about the flowers, are you? They're just a friendly gesture. Our conversations are about books and stuff like that. Nothing more." Her tone was reassuring, but I could see the flicker of something else in her eyes. Nervousness? Guilt? She placed her hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze. "I promise it's nothing to worry about." I forced a smile. "No, it's fine," I lied. "I trust you." She kissed me lightly on the cheek and changed the subject, but my mind stayed firmly on Ethan. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's schedule became increasingly unpredictable. The late nights at the café started to stretch even later, and her excuses felt flimsy. There was a problem with the coffee machine. One of the employees needed help closing up. I lost track of time talking to a customer. Each explanation was reasonable enough, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Then there was the change in her behavior. She seemed more distracted at home, her phone always within reach, often lighting up with notifications she didn't bother to explain. I never pried. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but it was eating me up inside. One night, she came home well past midnight. Her excuse was vague, something about inventory running late. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but my heart was pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest. The more I replayed her words in my mind, the more certain I became that Sarah was hiding something. I decided I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just sit there while my marriage, the life we'd built together, started to feel like a lie. I needed answers. I needed the truth. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. I'd never thought I'd be the kind of husband who'd consider hiring a private detective to follow his wife. But then again, I never thought I'd feel like a stranger in my own marriage, doubting every word Sarah said and analyzing every late-night excuse. Still, my instincts told me something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. At first, I tried to handle it myself. I thought about following Sarah after work or staking out the cafe, but life had other plans. My construction company had picked up several new contracts, and as a junior partner, I couldn't afford to slack off. The long hours and constant demands left me with little time to play detective. Frustrated, I realized I needed someone who could do the work for me, someone professional. After a bit of searching online, I found a private investigator named Greg Parsons. His website wasn't flashy, but it had solid reviews. Discretion, professionalism, and results. That's what the testimonials promised. I called him the next morning and arranged a meeting. Greg's office was tucked away in a nondescript building downtown. The man himself was in his mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that put me at ease immediately. He wore a simple gray suit, the kind that didn't stand out but spoke of quiet competence. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair after I'd explained the situation, "you're not sure if your wife is cheating, but her behavior has changed, and it's raising red flags." "Exactly," I replied. "I don't want to accuse her of anything without proof, but I also can't keep living like this, feeling like something's going on and not knowing what it is." Greg nodded. "This isn't unusual, Mike. Most of my clients come to me with similar concerns. Sometimes it's just a misunderstanding, and sometimes—" He paused, giving me a measured look. "Sometimes it's not. Either way, we'll get you the answers you need." We discussed the details, her schedule, the cafe, and the name Ethan, which he jotted down in a small notebook. Greg explained his process: discreet surveillance, gathering information, and keeping me updated without raising suspicions. "You'll need to be patient," he said as I stood to leave. "These things take time, but I'll find out what's going on." I shook his hand, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a plan. The following month was one of the longest of my life. I buried myself in work, trying not to dwell on what Greg might be uncovering. Every time Sarah came home late or seemed distracted, I reminded myself to wait. Greg would sort it out. Then, about 3 weeks in, Sarah came home unusually excited. "You'll never believe what happened today," she said, practically bursting through the door. "What's up?" I asked, setting my coffee cup down and bracing myself for whatever she had to share. "I lost my phone this morning," she began, her words tumbling out. "I think it slipped out of my bag when I was getting groceries. I didn't even realize it was missing until someone called the cafe saying they'd found it. Can you believe that? This kind person tracked me down and returned it." "That's lucky," I said, masking my surprise. "I know. I thought I'd have to get a new phone, but this guy, he didn't even want a reward, just handed it over with a smile and left. What a good Samaritan." She was glowing with gratitude, but my mind was racing. Could it have been Greg's doing? A way to access her phone or track her movements? The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. I didn't press the issue, but her story only fueled my anticipation. The truth, whatever it was coming, and soon. Greg's call came on a Wednesday morning, cutting through the hum of the construction site like a blade. "Mike," he said, his voice steady, "I've got the information. Can you meet me today?" I agreed, my heart pounding. The rest of the day passed in a blur as I replayed every moment, every conversation with Sarah, trying to prepare myself for whatever Greg had uncovered. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw in his office that evening. Greg handed me a slim folder as I sat across from him. "Take your time," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll go through it together." Inside were printed photos and a USB drive containing videos and screenshots. My hands shook slightly as I flipped through the images. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Sarah and a man I assumed was Ethan sitting at a small cafe table. They were smiling, leaning toward each other as if sharing a private joke. The next photo showed them at a more upscale restaurant. This time their hands were clasped across the table, a quiet intimacy that sent a chill through me. And then there it was, the damning image. Sarah and Ethan standing on a crowded city street, his arm around her waist, her face tilted toward his as they kissed. The sight hit me like a gut punch. My breath caught, and I had to look away, struggling to process what I was seeing. "Mike," Greg said softly, "there's more." He pulled out a tablet and opened a folder of text messages. I managed to gain access to her phone. These are the messages between Sarah and Ethan. The words on the screen felt like a hammer to my chest. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again?" Sarah, "Soon, I hope. I've been missing you too." I skimmed the exchanges, each message another blow to the life I thought we had. Plans to meet, compliments, inside jokes, and worst of all, declarations of feelings that should have been reserved for me, her husband. My thoughts spun in every direction at once. How had it come to this? I'd given Sarah everything, my love, my support, my money to open her cafe. And this was how she repaid me? I felt a mix of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak, the emotions tangling into a storm that threatened to consume me. The images and messages blurred as tears stung my eyes, but I quickly blinked them away. I couldn't afford to break down. Not now. "Are you okay, Mike?" Greg's voice grounded me. I nodded stiffly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for this," I said, closing the folder. I needed to know. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with memories of Sarah, her laughter, her smile, the way she'd been so excited when the cafe opened. It was hard to reconcile the woman I loved with the one in the photos, but the evidence was clear. Sarah had betrayed me. By morning, my despair had hardened into resolve. If Sarah wanted to throw away our marriage for Ethan, fine, but I wasn't going to let her take advantage of me any further. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a sharp divorce attorney named Rachel Simmons. Her reputation for handling high-stakes cases was exactly what I needed. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her tone professional but sympathetic, "how can I help?" I laid out the situation, showing her the folder Greg had given me. She went through it carefully, her expression giving nothing away. "Based on what you've told me, you're in a strong position," she said after a moment. "This is a no-fault state, but the evidence of infidelity will work in your favor when negotiating the division of assets. We can argue that her actions effectively ended the marriage. What about the cafe? I asked. I paid for most of it. I don't want her to walk away with everything. Rachel nodded. If we can show that you were the primary financial contributor, we can negotiate for a larger share of marital assets to offset that. You'll also want to gather records, bank statements, receipts, anything that shows your investment. Her calm, methodical approach gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. We discussed strategy, focusing on minimizing Sarah's claims and ensuring I could keep the assets I'd worked so hard to build. Mike, Rachel said as we wrapped up, I know this is difficult, but you're doing the right thing. You deserve a clean break. Driving home, I felt a mix of sorrow and determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. Sarah had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The next month was one of the strangest of my life. I smiled when I needed to, shared meals with Sarah, and even let her kiss me on the cheek as she left for work each morning. To her, everything seemed fine, but inside, I was unraveling, going over every detail of our life together and questioning how we'd come to this point. In reality, I was preparing for the end. I worked closely with Rachel, gathering financial records, compiling evidence, and finalizing the documents for divorce. I even thought long and hard about Sarah's cafe. In the end, I decided I'd let her keep it. Without my support, it wouldn't last long, and frankly, I wanted as clean a break as possible. When Rachel handed me the final folder of papers, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. She offered to have them served to Sarah, but I declined. No, I told her. I'll do it myself. That evening, I sat in the living room with the folder on the coffee table in front of me, waiting for Sarah to come home. When she walked in, she looked happier than she had in weeks. Hey, she greeted, her voice unusually cheerful. She set her bag down and walked over to me. You look serious. What's going on? I was waiting for you, I said, my tone even. There's something we need to talk about. Her expression shifted, her cheerfulness giving way to concern. What is it? Before I could speak, she sat down beside me and placed her hand on mine. Mike, you know how much I love you, right? Her voice was soft, affectionate. I've been thinking about expanding the cafe, maybe adding some new features. I hate to ask, but I need your help. It would really make a difference. I stared at her, the irony almost too much to bear. After everything, she was asking for more money. Sarah, I began, my voice calm but firm. You won't be getting more money from me, and actually, I need to give you this. I picked up the folder and handed it to her. Her brow furrowed as she opened it, her eyes scanning the first page. The color drained from her face as she read the word divorce. She looked up at me, her voice trembling. Mike, what is this? It's what it looks like, I said. I'm filing for divorce. She froze for a moment, then shook her head. Divorce? Why? What are you talking about? What did I do? I took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. Sarah, I feel like you're cheating on me. Your behavior's changed. You've been distant, and I can't ignore the signs anymore. Her eyes widened in shock. Cheating? Mike, how could you even think that? I would never... Her voice cracked, and she clutched the folder to her chest. I don't know where this is coming from, but it's not true. You have to believe me. I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. Sarah, whether you admit it or not doesn't matter. This marriage isn't working anymore. These conversations, these arguments, they're better handled in court. She started to cry, her sobs growing louder as she pleaded with me. Mike, please, I don't know what you think I've done, but this isn't fair. You're my husband. We can work through this. We love each other. I stood, putting some distance between us. I loved you, Sarah, but I can't live like this anymore, feeling like I'm the only one trying to make this work. I've made my decision. Her voice rose, hysterical now. You're throwing everything away based on a feeling? You don't even have proof. This is insane, Mike. I turned to leave the room, my heart heavy but resolute. If there's nothing to hide, then the truth will come out in court. I walked away, her cries echoing behind me. As I closed the door to our bedroom, I let out a long breath. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage would end, but it was the only path left. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. The courtroom was colder than I'd imagined it would be. The walls were bare, the lighting harsh, and the rows of benches filled with a mix of quiet spectators and legal professionals. Sarah sat a few feet away at her table, her expression a mixture of desperation and resolve. She looked at me often, as if trying to find some trace of the man she'd married, someone she could still convince to see reason. But I kept my face neutral, refusing to meet her gaze for too long. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the proceedings to order. Sarah's lawyer opened first, framing her as a devoted wife who was blindsided by my decision. Sarah took the stand, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Your Honor," she said, glancing between me and the judge, "I love my husband and I don't understand why he's doing this. He's been distant, cold, and unwilling to even talk to me. I believe he's going through something and I'm asking for time to save our marriage. We've been together for 8 years. That's not something you just throw away." Her plea was heartfelt, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then Rachel, my lawyer, rose to her feet and began her work. "Your Honor," Rachel began, her tone calm and deliberate, "while my client acknowledges the years he and Mrs. Hayes have spent together, we are here today because that trust has been irreparably broken. The evidence we will present will make clear that Mrs. Hayes has been unfaithful to her husband." The first pieces of evidence were the photos of Sarah and Ethan at the café, seemingly innocent but laying the groundwork. Then came the pictures from the restaurant, where their conversation grew more intimate, their hands entwined across the table. Sarah's lawyer objected, calling the images circumstantial. "Mrs. Hayes has many clients who visit her café," he argued. "This man, Ethan, is one of them. There's no proof that these meetings were anything more than professional." The judge nodded and Rachel continued, unfazed. "Let's move forward then." The next image hit like a thunderclap. Sarah and Ethan kissing on the street, oblivious to the world around them. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Rachel placed the photo on the screen. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, her tone stern, "do you have an explanation for this?" Sarah hesitated, her composure cracking. It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice unsteady. "Ethan is just a friend, a client, a like-minded person. We were caught up in the moment. It was a mistake, but it didn't mean anything." I clenched my fists under the table, anger surging as she downplayed what had been months of deceit. Rachel pressed on, presenting text messages that erased any lingering doubts. The messages revealed intimate conversations, plans to meet, and expressions of affection that Sarah couldn't explain away. By the time Rachel finished, Sarah was pale, her confidence shattered. The judge looked at her with a mix of pity and disappointment. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, her voice firm, "this evidence is clear. Your actions constitute infidelity under the law. We will now move to the division of assets." This was where I felt my preparation pay off. Rachel outlined my financial contributions to the marriage, the pre-divorce measures I'd taken to protect my personal assets, and my decision to voluntarily leave the café to Sarah. "Mr. Hayes understands that his wife's café was her dream," Rachel said. "He has no interest in claiming it, despite his significant financial investment in its establishment." The judge nodded approvingly. Sarah looked stunned, as if she couldn't believe I was being so generous. But when Rachel proposed selling the house and splitting the proceeds, Sarah's expression darkened. She wanted to keep the house, but Rachel made it clear that such an arrangement wasn't feasible given her financial situation. The judge ruled in my favor on all counts. My assets were protected, the house would be sold, and Sarah would keep the café. After the trial, Sarah tried repeatedly to reach me. She called, texted, and even showed up at my office once, begging to talk. "Mike, I made a mistake," she said one evening when I finally answered the phone. "I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. Please, let's start over." But I couldn't. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and Sarah had demolished it. I told her as much. "I can't believe you anymore, Sarah," I said. "You lied to me for months, and now you expect me to act like it never happened? I can't do that." She cried, pleaded, but I stayed firm. The trial had been the final chapter in our story, and there was no going back. Selling the house was a bittersweet experience. It had been the backdrop to 8 years of marriage, filled with laughter, love, and the memories of what I thought was a happy life. But as I signed the final paperwork and watched the real estate agent hand Sarah her share of the proceeds, I felt a sense of closure. The house was just a building now, a place where something had ended. Sarah used the money to pour back into her café, just as I expected. She expanded the menu and even hired a few more staff to try and attract more customers. At first it seemed like things might work out for her. I'd drive by occasionally and see the cafe bustling during the mornings, but the glow didn't last. Over time, the cracks began to show. Without my financial support, Sarah struggled to cover the mounting costs. She took out loans to keep things afloat, but it only delayed the inevitable. Reviews mentioned long wait times, inconsistent food quality, and a lack of Sarah's usual charm. It was clear she was drowning, both financially and emotionally. Ethan was long gone by then. I'd learned through mutual acquaintances that his availability was a lie. He was married with kids, and his wife had discovered his affair with Sarah. The fallout had been messy, and Ethan had cut ties with Sarah to try and salvage his own marriage. She'd gambled her marriage on him and lost everything. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt pity. Sarah's betrayal had destroyed our life together, but watching her spiral into debt and loneliness after the divorce wasn't something I took pleasure in. It just reminded me how fragile everything we'd built had been. As for me, I started over. I rented a modest apartment closer to the city, threw myself into work, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Being single again felt strange at first, like I'd forgotten how to navigate life without someone by my side. But as the months passed, I found a rhythm. I decided early on that I wouldn't rush into another relationship. The wounds from my marriage were still too raw, and I needed time to rediscover who I was outside of being Sarah's husband. So, I embraced the bachelor life, not the wild kind, but a quieter version where I could focus on myself. I started hiking on weekends. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life on my terms. Life moves on, and so did I. Maybe one day I'll meet someone new, someone who values trust and loyalty as much as I do. But for now, I'm content. The scars from my marriage remind me of the lessons I've learned, and the peace I've found reminds me that I made the right decision. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.